Putin, because they both went through a hell of a lot because of the so-called Russia hoax.
What is Russia breaks these talks? What do you do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you saying?
She's asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
But what if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now? Okay? What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting.
You know, about 5 feet to the left of Donald Trump is a man who once ran the Senate Intel Committee. And he ran it when the Republicans were in the majority. And this is what Senator Marco Rubio's Senate Intel Committee report said about the 2016 campaign. Paul Manafort's receptivity to Russian outreach in the campaign was a, quote, grave counterintelligence threat that made the campaign susceptible to, quote, malign Russian influence. Maybe that's another reason why Marco Rubio was slouching on the couch on it, because when you have the Republican Senate Intel Committee saying that Donald Trump's 2016 campaign posed a, quote, in Marco Rubio's Senate Intel Committee reports language, a, quote, grave counterintelligence threat to the United States of America and made them susceptible to malign Russian influences. Doesn't sound like much of a hoax, does it?
No, you know, and for that whole period that Trump was referring to, it was this cloak and dagger story of was there something behind the scenes that we didn't know? Was there collusion? All these terms of those years ago. It's now happening in the open. There's no need to investigate anything. It is happening before our eyes. The Kremlinization of the White House. I think, you know, so much has happened since January 20th, but I think that Friday meeting hit people who watched it in a way that very few things have, because it felt like to me the kind of end of the free world as a concept and a construct that the United States is involved with.
Right.
Isn't it interesting how that when you looked at what happened in London the next day, suddenly it looked like, you know, Ronald Reagan saying America was a city shining brightly on the hill for all the world to see, talking about pushing back against Russian aggression, Russian expansion. Suddenly it looked like that center had been ceded to 10 Downing Street.
And centering him.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer got to have his Love Actually moment.
He had his Love
Actually moment. Hugh Grant finally develops a little backbone.
You saw King Charles III actually not shocked that Zelensky dressed a good bit like Winston Churchill in World War II at times.
Oh, wow.
It's an incredible moment. I think David's piece is so beautiful and haunting. And this moment, it feels like the end of something and the beginning of something else. The end of a moment where you could talk about the American president as a leader of the free world and have that concept mean anything. And it's, of course, built on the stuff J.D. Vance went to Munich and said, and it's built on these withdrawing from Article 5 commitments and things like that. But it's also the soft launch, or maybe the hard launch, of, I think, another uglier America as the dominant expression of this country now in the world. I don't think it's one meeting. I don't think it's one policy. And I don't think it's one man.
Yeah.
No, anecdotally, you're right. People even who don't pay much attention to politics, I heard from in the last couple of days being horrified at what happened on Friday, because it felt like a betrayal of Ukraine. And also Americans, of course, have had generations to learn to distrust Russia, and suddenly we seem to be siding with them.
We discussed Churchill in terms of clothing, but let's the analogy here is really, imagine if Churchill, who used to come to the FDR's Oval Office to plan the defense of Europe, imagine if instead of defending him, FDR had dressed him down and humiliated Winston Churchill. Zelensky is that kind of figure for his country. Zelensky is and he's never asked anything from us other than resources and money, which is a lot, but never human lives. We have not lost one life in Europe.
And this is a point that many have tried to make. By the way, Zelensky, there are montages of Zelensky thanking Americans.
Dozens of times.
Dozens and dozens of times. In that meeting, before Congress, dozens of times. And what I guess is lost here on some people is that Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, with the help of Europe and the United States of America, and American factory workers and American factories who created, and jobs that were created in supporting Ukraine, have decimated the Russian war machine, which, again, while they were seen as not being on par with the United States, still considered the second strongest military operation in the world. They have been decimated by the Ukrainians.
They have, and they've lost hundreds of thousands of lives and people wounded. There's one big difference between Putin and Zelensky. Putin doesn't care.
Right.
He doesn't care if the meat grinder takes up another 100,000 of his own people. He's paying people to come into the army. Very, very, very poor families are accepting these payments. It's horrible.
And who made the point about the sacrifice the Ukrainians have made on the U.S. behalf? Lindsey Graham, 2 weeks ago. Frank Foer, you have written about Zelensky just about a week ago, saying that he was the one person who stood up to Trump and therefore angers him so much. Talk to us about that dynamic that we saw on full display Friday in the Oval Office.
I think one of the things that's just so striking when you play these things back is the way in which the attacks on Putin are so triggering to Donald Trump. And it takes me back to kind of Russiagate 101, which is why does Vladimir Putin care so much about American foreign policy and American democracy? The reason that he cares is because he faced domestic revolt himself against liberal forces. He watched in the former Soviet Union the way in which the Orange Revolution and the Rose Revolution took down his allies. And his fundamental goal was to discredit democracy. And part of the reason that he was rooting for Donald Trump in 2016 to win was that he wanted to discredit American democracy. And so when we see the fundamental realignment that's happening right now, it's holding a mirror up to ourselves. We care about Zelensky because he did these very brave things. He had the movie moment of "We're still here," but we cared about him because he was standing up on behalf of democracy. And to see him get trashed in the Oval Office like that, and to see the way in which the Russians are gloating about all of this, says that we've fundamentally realigned here. I think the reason it stings so much for us is because I think we can see the course that we're on for our own country, and that our foreign policy is reflecting something, I think, pretty devastating about what's happening here domestically to us.
David, it also, we always talk about the arc of history, bending towards justice. We've always looked at our failings and our shortcomings and where we've made mistakes. But we've been able to look beyond that and to say, we need to improve. We need to move toward a more perfect union. But this is the country that defeated Nazism. This is the country that pushed back Stalin in 47, that kept Western Europe free. This is the country that liberated Eastern Europe by being stubborn during the Cold War. There are statues of Ronald Reagan across Eastern Europe. When American troops went to Poland, Mika's brother was the ambassador there. Polish people came out into the streets weeping and saying, never again. A country that had been put through the meat grinder by the Germans and then the Soviets. Never again. We were the guarantors of freedom. That is a story, as Joan Didion would say, that we tell ourselves so we sleep at night. And it's a story we believe. That seemed to disappear last Friday. That story seemed to be ripped out of the American canon on Friday.
Unless we stand up.
Unless we stand up. No.
And I think that if you cede all politics and all rhetoric and all strength to the almighty president of the United States, then the reality and the darkness you're describing will come.
Editor of The New Yorker, David Remnick, thank you very much for coming on again this morning. And his latest piece is available to read online.